Today, we are diving into one of history's absolute greatest what-ifs. It's a question that has fascinated scholars and storytellers for centuries. It's something Carl Sagan even famously talked about in Cosmos, walking through this ghostly vision of its halls, mourning a future that we just never got. So we're going to explore the legend, the loss, and we're going to imagine a world where the greatest library ever known was never lost.
So yeah, this is the big one. What if it survived? And we're not just talking about a building filled with books, we're talking about the entire trajectory of human history. What actual knowledge was lost in there? Not just poems, but think about it. Detailed histories, forgotten sciences, entire fields of math, just gone. What amazing technologies were delayed by hundreds, maybe even thousands of years? And how different would our world, our society, even the way we think, look today if this one place had made it? It's a huge question, and to even begin to answer it, we have to understand what the Library of Alexandria really was.
All right, so first, let's just wrap our heads around the sheer scale and importance of this place. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just some landmark, it was an idea, a huge, ambitious idea brought to life in a city that was itself brand new and radical, a Greek metropolis plopped right down in the middle of ancient Egypt. It was this incredible melting pot of cultures and ideas, and in an age where empires were built with swords, this was an attempt to build an empire of the mind. In a very real way, it was the collective brain of the ancient world.
I mean, the goal here was just breathtakingly bold. The rulers of Egypt, the Ptolemies, wanted a copy of every single book in the world. This was a massive, state-funded project. They sent agents all over the Mediterranean with huge budgets to just buy up scrolls. And get this, if a ship docked in Alexandria's harbor, by law, it had to be searched. Any books they found? Confiscated. They were taken to the library where scribes would copy the whole thing word for word. Then they'd give the brand new copy back to the owner and keep the original for the library's collection. This wasn't passive collecting. It was an aggressive, state-sponsored mission to grab all of human thought and put it in one place.
So to put this on a timeline for you, we're talking about the 3rd century BCE, right after Alexander the Great. One of his top generals, Ptolemy, starts a dynasty in Egypt, and he wants his new capital, Alexandria, to be the best. So he sets up this thing called the Museum, the Temple of the Muses. Now, this wasn't a museum like we think of it. It was more like a revolutionary university, a think tank, and the Great Library was its beating heart. For centuries, this was the place to be if you were a genius. They'd invite you from all over, give you a salary, free food, a place to live, and get this, you didn't have to pay taxes. It was basically an academic's paradise. Guys like Euclid, the man who literally wrote the book on geometry, worked here. So did Eratosthenes, the guy who calculated the circumference of the entire planet with stunning accuracy. It was a powerhouse of study, debate, and discovery.
400,000 scrolls. Just let that number sink in for a minute. This is in an age with no printing press. Every single word had to be written out by hand. 400,000 was a colossal number, bigger than any other collection on Earth. And a lot of these weren't just copies, they were the only existing originals. We know from little scraps and references that they had the lost plays of famous Greek playwrights, the complete histories of ancient Babylon, astronomical charts. We're talking about entire genres of literature, scientific papers we don't even know were missing. Just gone. It was a treasure trove of genius, which makes what happened to it all the more heartbreaking.
Okay, and this is where we need to clear up a really common myth. The popular image, the one you see in the movies, it's always a single giant fire. One dramatic moment where all that knowledge goes up in smoke. But the real story, well, it's a lot messier, and honestly, it's even more tragic. It's not as simple as one big fire. It was a long, slow, painful decline that happened over centuries.
So here's the key takeaway. There was no one single burning of the Library of Alexandria. That idea is a powerful myth, but it kind of misses the real lesson here. The truth is, knowledge doesn't always get lost in a big dramatic explosion. Sometimes it just withers. It dies from neglect, from political fights, from budget cuts, from people just deciding it isn't important anymore. The library's end was a death by 1,000 cuts, not one single sword stroke. And that's a much scarier story, because it tells you how easily a civilization can just let its greatest achievements slip away.
Let's just walk through this slow-motion train wreck. So way back in 48 BCE, Julius Caesar is in a jam in Alexandria.
He sets fire to some enemy ships in the harbor, and the fire spreads. It burns down a warehouse that had some scrolls in it, maybe books waiting to be shipped out. It was a hit, for sure, but it wasn't the main library. Okay, fast forward 300 years to the 270s CE. The city is a war zone. The whole royal district, where the main library was, gets completely trashed. That was probably the biggest physical blow. Then, in 391 CE, you have this period of intense religious conflict, and a mob destroys a sister library housed in a temple called the Serapeum. And underneath all that violence, you have the quiet killers. Centuries of budget cuts from Roman emperors, political purges that drove scholars away, and just a general cultural shift where this ancient knowledge was seen as less and less important. It just faded, starved of money and relevance, until one day, it was gone.
Okay, now for the really fun part. We know what it was, we know how it was really lost. So now we can ask, what if it hadn't been? What if the funding had continued? What if the scholars had kept working right through the Dark Ages? What if all that ancient knowledge wasn't something we had to rediscover, but was just an unbroken chain of learning? Let's dive into that alternate timeline.
Right, so this is where we get to do some informed speculating. Those scrolls didn't just have poetry and philosophy. They held blueprints for technologies and scientific ideas that our world wouldn't see again for over 1,000 years. You know, it's the difference between starting a civilization with a full instruction manual versus finding a few torn, soaking wet pages centuries later and having to guess the rest. What if those seeds of genius had been allowed to grow instead of getting buried?
Okay, check this out. This isn't science fiction. This is real. An engineer named Hero of Alexandria, who worked at the museum, actually built a working steam engine. It was called an aeolipile, a metal sphere that would spin like crazy when you heated water inside to produce jets of steam. In our timeline, people thought it was just a cool party trick, a novelty. Rome's slave economy didn't really need labor-saving machines. But what if the library's engineers had kept studying Hero's work? What if they'd refined it? We could be talking about a Roman industrial revolution, Roman steam-powered pumps, steam-powered cranes, maybe even primitive trains. A full 1,500 years ahead of schedule. Just think about that.
Or how about this? Our place in the universe. We give Copernicus all the credit for figuring out the Earth revolves around the sun in the 1500s. But a guy named Aristarchus proposed the exact same idea in the 3rd century BCE. His complete work with all his math and arguments was in the library. We only know about it because someone else mentioned it in passing. If that original text had survived, been studied, and debated for centuries, the scientific revolution could have started in ancient Greece. Maybe the whole conflict between Galileo and the Church never would have happened because science would have had a more accurate model of the cosmos for over 1,000 years. And the dominoes just keep falling from there. Imagine how much further along our medicine would be. The Alexandrians were the first to do scientific dissections of human bodies, but most of their work is lost. With those texts, medicine could have jumped ahead by centuries. Or a Roman age of exploration, using accurate maps and calculations of the Earth's size from the library's experts. And the Renaissance, when it finally did happen, it wouldn't have been a rebirth of lost knowledge. It would have been the next step up, building on an unbroken 1,500-year foundation to reach heights we can't even begin to imagine.
So, all of this brings us to today. Because this isn't just some fun historical thought experiment. The story of the Library of Alexandria, its incredible ambition, and its slow, sad ending has a really urgent lesson for us right now. We live in the information age. We are surrounded by more data than anyone in history could have ever dreamed of. But if Alexandria teaches us anything, it's that just because you have a lot of information doesn't mean it's safe. In fact, our knowledge today might be vaster, but in a lot of ways, it's also much, much more fragile. Here's the bottom line. The things that destroyed the Great Library, neglect, budget cuts, war, people with conflicting ideologies, those things haven't gone away. Not at all. They've just changed their shape. The fragility of knowledge is a constant threat. And if we ignore that, we put our own massive digital libraries at terrible risk. The warning from Alexandria is clear. What has been collected can be scouted. And sometimes it happens so quietly you don't even notice until it's too late.
I mean, just look at our modern versions of the library. You've got the Internet Archive, trying to do the impossible and save a copy of the entire internet, constantly fighting for funding. You've got global scientific databases that hold the keys to modern medicine.
You have the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which is literally a library of life itself, trying to protect our planet's crops, and you have countless digital archives trying to save our art, our music, our culture. Every single one of these is a modern marvel, and every single one is incredibly vulnerable.
The threats we face today aren't just fire and swords anymore. Misinformation is like an anti-library that tries to bury the truth. Data loss from a simple server crash, or something called digital decay, where old files just become unreadable, can silently erase history. Censorship can lock away huge sections of our shared knowledge with the flip of a switch. These threats are quieter, sneakier than a fire, but they can be every bit as destructive.
And so that responsibility, it falls on us. Back then, it was up to a few hundred scholars and their king. Today, we're all part of it. We create, we share, we consume information on a scale they couldn't even fathom. And that makes all of us custodians. It means we have to choose to support the people and places that preserve knowledge. We have to fight misinformation. We have to actually value the slow, hard work of preservation. The health of our modern library depends on us. We are the new librarians.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. The real tragedy of Alexandria wasn't just a mythical fire. It was a slow, quiet fade. So look around our world today. Think about the indigenous languages that have just a handful of speakers left, each one holding a unique way of seeing the world. Think about the stories of our own families, the early digital photos on old hard drives that won't turn on anymore. What essential pieces of our civilization are we currently underfunding, undervaluing, and just letting drift away? What knowledge are we right now letting fade into silence?